Putin has to have this war in order to survive. I mean, to literally survive. If for some reason he loses power, he goes to jail and he dies. And in order for Putin to stay in power, there's no chance of a settlement. There's no chance of a negotiation. He's all in, and that's what this defense budget increase says, is that he's all in.
So look, this is news. This ramping up of spending, this volume of spending on defense and security by Russia in the coming year, that should alarm and concern Ukraine and Western allies, shouldn't it?
Well, like anything, it depends what your benchmark is, what your time frame is, and what comparators you have. And we know from the 9th of November at the G7 meeting that Blinken's missives on 4 tracks there were optimistic for the future, that that Ukraine will keep fighting to win its territory back, that we will enable them to build a world-class army so that they're not threatened in the future, and that we will accelerate their reforms so that they've got this optimistic hope for joining the EU and ultimately NATO when they are successful.
Yes.
Now, of course, for those things to be true, they still need to be supported militarily, economically, and humanitarian aid. And people have got into a sort of a bit of a gloomy furrow on this when it probably doesn't need to be. So Germany has said that they'll double their military support and aid next year. We just need to unlock probably the stasis of America, the $300 billion that was on offer in September when the Senate had sorted out its own business. So I don't think it's as gloomy, and I don't think that we should necessarily worry too much in NATO when we've already got the accession of Finland. We've got Sweden joining, which adds to the problem of Russia. And in fact, the fact that the Russians have taken their air defense essentially from Kaliningrad in the last week or so sort of brings a lie to this business that Russia believes that they're always going to be attacked by NATO, when 3 NATO countries, from their perspective, surround that, and yet they've taken a significant capability out.
Yes.
So the real comparator is that the NATO budget is over 1 trillion. So I don't think there's necessarily any reason to be alarmed from a NATO perspective at the moment, but in grand strategic terms, the Russians think in centuries, not in terms of 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years.
Yes, well, clearly NATO is stronger for the addition of new members like Finland and Sweden. Russia, though, with this extra spending, will be looking to learn the lessons of the Ukraine war. What are the lessons you think they'll be applying, Chip, in deciding how to spend this money?
Well, if they were wise, they would go back to what in 2013 was loosely called the Gerasimov Doctrine, when you use the force of politics rather than the politics of force. And that is subverting the West by information operations, propaganda, and subversion. It's using indiscreet and deniable attacks, something like underwater cables, which power the digital economy of the West. But it wouldn't be true to say that they haven't learned some lessons from the fighting already, in terms of how they've now approached in the last 6 months the sensor to shooter, in terms of the kill chain from things like first-person view drones to the shooter systems, which is how they were enabled to destroy that significant grouping of Ukrainian soldiers at a medal award ceremony recently. What they brought to their sort of conceptual knowledge in terms of all arms warfare being allied to those things to do with drones and electronic warfare, we'll kind of have to see, because a lot of that budgetary increase, of course, will go to re-establishing some of their capability, because the numbers of systems that they've lost so far are, of course, huge. As at yesterday, the number of tanks, according to Ukraine, is 5,520, 10,282 armored personnel carriers, 7,878 artillery systems. These numbers are just off the scale in any military, and to replenish that is going to take a lot of money and a lot of time, given that Russian industry has shortages which reach 42% for July 23 onwards. And all of this, of course, has to be acceptable to the Russian population for the future. We'll have to wait and see for that with the presidential election, where I think Putin will not emphasize the Ukrainian war. He'll emphasize Russia's alleged stability and his criticisms of the West and the Russian world being different than the West, which is why he will sell that to the population.
All right, Chip Chapman, thank you. Let's get the thoughts now of Bill Browder, who's the head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, also author of Red Notice. Welcome back to the show, Bill. What do you read into this big increase in defense and security spending? What do you make of it?
Well, first and foremost, Putin has to have this war in order to survive. I mean, to literally survive. If for some reason he loses power, he goes to jail and he dies. And in order for Putin to stay in power, there's no chance of a settlement. There's no chance of a negotiation. He's all in. And that's what this defense budget increase says, is that he's all in, that there's not going to be a peace treaty. There's not going to be a negotiation. And the other thing that he's hoping for is that we lose our nerve in the West to give the Ukrainians the support they need militarily and financially to hold up or to beat him. And there's a lot of murmurings in different countries, particularly among certain presidential candidates in the United States,
Yes.
leading into the November 2024 elections, which is effectively for Putin a Hail Mary. If Trump were to be elected, he would cut off military aid for Ukraine, and then the Ukrainians would be in a terrible place, and Putin would be in exactly the place he wants to be in.
Right. So if this budget, this Russian defense budget, and the thinking of Putin is about perpetual war, then that could place some strain on the support that Ukraine is getting now from allies, all of whom say, look, we'll back Ukraine to the hilt, but talk behind the scenes of some war weariness, and that prospect is going to put more such strain on that support.
Well, I mean, we're saying we're going to back Ukraine to the hilt, but everybody has this fantasy in their minds, and that somehow there's going to be a settlement, there's going to be a peace treaty, and they're encouraging Zelensky to do a settlement. But how can he do a settlement with a dictator who's just upped his military budget by a massive amount to continue the war? Putin has no intention of doing a settlement, and I think that we're kind of all living in a fantasy world. The political world is, and I can see the strain. And so it's not even as if we're planning on increasing the Ukrainian military support. We're talking about cutting it, and cutting it at a time when Putin is increasing his military budget. It's potentially a big problem for Ukraine, and then potentially a big problem for us.
Okay, fascinating to get your views, Bill, as always. Bill Browder there.